You're listening to Let's Get Surety. Let me hear your bonding talk with Kat Shamapande.
Hey everyone, thanks for joining us for Let's Get Surety. We're recording today, it's March 31st, and we're recording from our home studios. So you'll notice our sound quality isn't what it is when we're in the official studio, but we wanted to get information out to everyone as quickly as we could. So we're doing the best that we can working from home, just like everyone else. Today with me as a co-host, I have Mark McCallum,
Good to be
CEO
back on the
of
program. Thanks, Kat.
Yeah, thanks for joining me, Mark. It's great to have you. And our guest for this episode is Mike Zisa.
Hey, Kat. How are you? Hey, Mark. It's great to be here.
Hey, Mike. Can you tell us a little bit about yourself and your firm?
Sure. So again, my name is Mike Zisa. I'm an attorney with Peckar Abramson. I work out of their Washington, D.C. office. My practice focuses on representing construction companies and sureties, really in all aspects of their business, from contract negotiations to contract administration, as issues are coming up on a project, helping them navigate those waters, to claims that come up during a project, as well as claims that happen after the project. And I use that construction background and base to also help sureties navigate payment and performance bond claims.
Well, it's great to have you on with us, Mike, and we're excited to talk to Mike about force majeure today. So what is force majeure, Mike? I don't think I've really heard that word as much before, the past month.
Absolutely. There's no doubt that in this unprecedented time that we're experiencing now with the coronavirus, force majeure has become a buzzword in the construction industry. Obviously, the industry is being impacted by this pandemic. In our region, Maryland and Virginia and D.C., construction operations have not been stopped altogether because construction is still deemed an essential activity. But in some regions, New York, Pennsylvania, Massachusetts, Washington, construction has been shut down. But point is, construction is being impacted, whether it's being delayed, disrupted, or there are additional costs that are arising out of the impact of this pandemic. And that's where force majeure comes in. It's a French term, and it means greater force. And it's a provision that has been buried in contracts for years and years and years. And frankly, it doesn't get a lot of fanfare, except under these really unprecedented circumstances. And what it says is that because of some greater force, the parties are relieved, or a party is relieved of its obligations under the contract. And the types of greater force really can vary, but it can be governmental orders, strikes, natural disasters, and it also can include pandemics and governmental orders that arise out of pandemics and other national crises as we're living through right now. And so the first step that a contractor really needs to take if they are being impacted on a project is to look at their contract and determine, do I have a force majeure provision in my contract? And and then understand what that force majeure provision provides. And it's not always going to be called force majeure or have that title on it. It could be buried in a delay provision, in a termination provision. So you have to look carefully to determine whether your contract contains the provision and whether it's applicable to these circumstances. But I'll be honest, it would be hard to imagine that a commercial construction contract wouldn't contain a provision that would relate to or afford some relief to a contractor and to an owner in this situation.
Hey, Mike, are there force majeure clauses in like American Institutes of Architects construction contracts or the Engineers Joint Contract Documents Committee contracts?
Yes, there are. Yeah, there are the standard provisions that entitle contractors to additional time for delays or impacts associated with a force majeure event.
Does the federal government have a similar clause?
They do. The federal acquisition regulations do include a provision that excuses delay. Again, here it's not called a force majeure provision, but what it does, it says the government can terminate a contractor for delaying or for not prosecuting the contract in accordance with the schedule, unless they are entitled to excusable delays for force majeure events, which would specifically and do specifically under the FAR include a pandemic type event. So yeah,
Are there other names for this clause that maybe people might have heard of in the construction contracting arena?
Well, yes. I mean, there could be, it would be delay. There could be a delay clause.
Delay clause.
It also does come up. I've seen it in a termination clause or default provision of the contract where it says, as it is under the FAR, the Federal Acquisition Regulations, the government contract, where you can be terminated or declared in default for your untimely performance unless you can show an excusable delay because of a force majeure event.
I've heard the term acts of God. Is that the same thing or is that different?
It's the same thing.
Okay.
It's exactly the same thing.
Well, and Mike, as you mentioned, since it may not always be obvious, it's probably good to consult with your attorney.
I think that's fair advice. It's not self-serving at all, but I think that is fair advice. And here's the interesting points that I want to make. There has been this real focus on force majeure. I mean, there's no exaggeration since this pandemic has really taken hold. I've received and seen 24 articles about force majeure provisions, and it is important because, as I said, you can be terminated if you're behind schedule. You're subject to liquidated damages, possibly. You can be subject to other damages, consequential damages. As I said, termination. So there are real reasons why you want that additional time. But typically, under a force majeure provision, you're only entitled to time, additional time. You're not entitled to additional compensation. And that's a really important issue for contractors to understand, is that you can't, under a typical force majeure provision, you're not going to be able to say, well, I was delayed 100 days because of this, and I had to accelerate, and I spent an extra $1 million, so I want to get paid. That's not typically going to be permitted under a force majeure provision. What we have been talking to our contractor clients about is looking to other provisions of the contract where you could potentially, in addition to the time element, you can also seek additional compensation. So some of those provisions, sort of to be keeping in mind and be looking for, suspension clauses, extras or change clauses in the contract, emergency clauses. Some contracts contain provisions under emergency scenarios that entitle the contractor to take certain emergency actions. They may be limited, but they take those emergency actions and there you can get additional time, but you also can get additional compensation. Another provision to keep your eyes on and to see if it's applicable would be a differing site condition provision. It says, hey, look, when I bid this contract, I expected to perform my work in this certain manner. Now this unforeseen pathogen, this virus, has infiltrated my project. And as a result of that, I've had to change the way I perform my work. I'm complying with CDC and other state regulations regarding how I work site safety and how I go about performing my work. And so contractors really need to be looking beyond just this force majeure provision to determine what other rights, what other avenues they have to protect themselves in these situations.
Hey, Mike, it sounds like that, delivering notice and the way you characterize that notice is pretty important. Do you want to say a little bit more about that?
Absolutely. It's essential. This is what we have been talking to our clients about. Is this is not the knee jerk or the sort of standard operating procedure time. This is a time where, because this is so unique and such uncharted waters, you really want to be very careful about the notices you're giving and to ensure that you're properly triggering the contractual provisions, giving the timely and proper notice. But also, we've been talking to clients about sort of preserving neutral, not taking the extreme position. A subcontractor comes to you and says, "Look, I can't get guys to come to the project because of this situation." Under certain circumstances, you might be quick to fire off a notice of default to that. You're in default. We're going to terminate you because you're failing to come to the project. Is that the right avenue? Preserving neutral, taking the position that doesn't preserves your rights, but it also doesn't cut off rights that you may have against the owner. And so it's these are unique times where you have to be careful about the types of notice you give and how you give them. Now, as part of that, what we have really been encouraging people to do is to seek direction from the owner. Rather than having the knee-jerk reaction and firing off a letter, whether it's to the owner or to a subcontractor, taking a hard and fast position, explain the situation, explain the circumstances that you're encountering, and seek direction. Seek guidance from the owner. How do they want to proceed? Do they want you to shut down an aspect of the project? Do they want you to hire a second crew? They seek their input so that you then can make them a team member, get them on board with what you're doing. And as part of that, you're going to then seek your additional time. To the extent there's additional compensation attached to it, seek that additional compensation, but get their buy-in on the process rather than doing it just sort of in isolation as you might normally do it on a project.
So it sounds like, when they're having those communications, maybe speaking with their attorney first might be a good idea to make sure they're framing the language the right way, to make sure they're not leaving any of their rights at the door, so to speak. Would you agree with that?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I know there's sometimes a hesitancy about reaching out to the attorney, especially if you've been hearing so much about force majeure and you say, okay, well, that's the answer. Here, look, I have it. It even says force majeure. I'm going to cite to this and I'm going to send this letter and I'll be good. It's really not that simple. It is a unique situation, and I think there is making sure that you're preserving your rights and sort of navigating these waters efficiently and properly is going to be important down the road when things when this passes and the dust settles. It's going to be important that you've taken the right steps now.
And then what about documentation? So maybe you provided the proper notice, then I would imagine it's incumbent upon the contractor to, give the substantiating documents, materials to the owner so that they can see the impact. What do you think, Mike?
Yeah, absolutely. The contract may specifically require certain documentation. So it's not just, hey, I'm being impacted. It's I'm being impacted. Here's specifically how I'm being impacted, and you may have to provide all of the support either with the claim or as it's happening. But even if there isn't that specific contractual requirement, that burden is going to be on you, the contractor, down the road to substantiate your claim. And so it is incumbent upon you to create separate categories, cost codes, however you do it, buckets, where those costs are being segregated and specifically tracked. But it's not enough just to sort of drop them into that bucket. You want to say, I had to set up additional wash stations on the project because of executive order number 54 that came out on this project in Maryland, because that's what it mandated. Or I had to cut down from 3 crews to 2 crews because of this executive order, and that slowed down my productivity. In other words, you want to make sure that you are tracking these costs, segregating these costs very carefully, because giving the notice and checking that box is important, but making sure that when it comes time, you can support the damages and support the claims that you're making, that you've done this work now, it'll pay off in the long run.
Mike, is there a possibility that maybe something fits within a, quote, force majeure clause, and it might be excusable, but then a subsequent action by an owner or a contracting authority may even turn it into something else, like a compensable delay?
Possibly, and one of the, that's why we're encouraging contractors to go talk to their owners, because it may be that certainly be force majeure and certainly entitled to more time, but you may have a fight over the entitlement if you sort of the dollar part of it. But if you get the owner buy-in at the time, saying, here's what we're going to do. If we want to keep this project on track, on schedule, I need to add this safety feature, or I need to spread my forces in this way. It's going to cost more money, but it's going to deliver your project at or close to on time. Do you want to do this? And if they say, yes, I want to do this, okay, then you get that change order now, and you've got that resolved. Whereas if you don't do it, and you don't get their buy-in or get their commitment to it, then you're going to be possibly in a position where you're either defending yourself, saying you didn't do enough to keep on track, or you're going to be seeking these additional costs for staying on track, and you're going to be fighting about it down the road. I encourage contractors to think these issues through and communicate with their owners and try to get buy-in on these issues rather than leaving it to chance.
So, clearly bond producers are not attorneys, but I was curious maybe what advice you might give to the surety community, how they can help their contractors through this. It sounds like that expression, know thy contract, is an important one. So perhaps they can help issue spot, or do you have other advice you would give to bond producers?
Well, yeah, call an attorney. but in all honesty, that's why I mentioned looking beyond the force majeure, because I think issue spotting wise, right now, that is, I think, the big headline for hey, we got to see if we have force majeure. This is force majeure. But I think you could be overlooking other better avenues of recovery, and specifically, like I said, the extras and changes provision, the differing site conditions, the suspension provision, the emergency operations provision. Those for a bond producer. If they're getting the call, hey, I'm being impacted, what should I do? They can say, hey, look to your contract first and foremost, but look, force majeure, look at changes, look at suspension, look at emergency, look at different site conditions. I think that at least gets them on the road, gets the contractor on the road to exploring what their options are and making sure that they are taking the necessary steps to afford themselves of the rights that the contract may provide.
So it sounds like even if you don't have a, quote, force majeure clause in your contract, or it doesn't have the magic word epidemic or something like that, there's still opportunities for recovery.
That's right. I do think there are going to be change. This created a differing site condition, a changed circumstance that the contractor was unforeseeable, presumptively unforeseeable at the time of contracting. And so I do think that this could create circumstances beyond the force majeure provision that would entitle a contractor to additional time and possibly money.
So if you had one last word of wisdom to construction firms out there, given what they're going through right now, what would you leave them with?
It would be read your contract, understand your contract terms, but communicate. Communicate with your owners, communicate with your subcontractors, communicate with your employees about the understanding these issues and understanding that the sort of standard response to daily events and activities may not be the right response under these unique circumstances.
And Mike, I know that Peckar Abramson has put together a task force around COVID-19. Where can people go to get the information that you guys are putting together on that?
So if you go to our website, it's pecklaw.com, PECKLAW.com. There's a banner right across the top that will link you to our COVID-19 task force that has a wealth of information on it. I will say we have daily calls, the committee, and we are talking about all of the issues that are flying around, from straight construction issues that we just discussed, but also the employment aspects of it, the project financing aspects of it. Now we're looking at, with the new Relief Act, what potential avenues contractors may have available to them. And it's really a pretty, I think, a unique forum where there's a great exchange of ideas. So I would recommend people to check out the website and see there's a lot of helpful information.
Mike, great information and great resources. We can't thank you enough for being on.
You've been listening to Let's Get Surety, brought to you by the National Association of Surety Bond Producers. For more information about the NASBP and its members, visit nasbp.org.